In 1973, Saudi Arabia sold oil for gold, yen, marks any currency buyers wanted. America had no special claim, no leverage, no control. By 1975, every barrel of Saudi oil was sold exclusively in dollars, not by choice, by treaty. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia prices oil in dollars only. In exchange, America guarantees military protection and weapons sales. Within a decade, the entire OPEC cartel followed. Oil, the most traded commodity on Earth, could only be bought with American currency. Welcome to Financial Rewind. I'm here to show you the invisible weapons that shape geopolitics. And today, we're exposing the Petrodollar System, the secret deal that turned a commodity into a currency weapon and made the dollar more powerful than any army. This is how you build an empire in the modern age, not through colonies, through control of the one thing every nation on Earth desperately needs. Washington, D.C., August 1971. President Richard Nixon makes an announcement that will reshape global power. The United States is ending the gold standard. Dollars will no longer be convertible to gold. The Bretton Woods system, which made the dollar the world's reserve currency by backing it with gold, is dead. Wall Street panics. Foreign governments panic. If the dollar isn't backed by gold, why should anyone use it? The dollar crashes. By 1973, it's lost 10% of its value. Foreign central banks are quietly dumping dollar reserves. The American empire, built on dollar dominance since 1944, is collapsing. Treasury Secretary William Simon is sent on a secret mission to Saudi Arabia. The details of his trip won't be declassified for decades. But the result changes everything. Saudi Arabia agrees to price all its oil exclusively in dollars, no other currency accepted, and crucially, Saudi Arabia will invest its oil revenues back into UTAN's treasury bonds. In exchange, the United States provides military protection, advanced weapons, and a guarantee. The House of Saud will remain in power. The deal is signed in secrecy. No public announcement, no congressional approval. Just a handshake agreement between Treasury officials and Saudi royals. By 1975, the rest of OPEC follows Saudi Arabia's lead. Every major oil producer now prices in dollars exclusively. Bretton Woods is dead. But the dollar's dominance is reborn, stronger than before. Because now it's not backed by gold, it's backed by oil. And oil is more valuable than gold ever was. Here's how the petrodollar system works, and why it's more powerful than any military weapon. Every country on Earth needs oil. For transportation, for manufacturing, for electricity, for agriculture. To buy oil, you need dollars. Even if you're buying Saudi oil to ship to China, the transaction happens in dollars. This creates permanent demand for U.S. currency. No matter what America does, print money, run deficits, start wars, the world needs dollars to buy energy. And here's the mechanism that makes it devastating. Oil exporters accumulate massive dollar reserves. Billions pour in every month. What do they do with those dollars? They can't just hold cash. Inflation erodes it. So they invest it. And the safest, most liquid dollar investment is U.S. Treasury bonds. Saudi Arabia alone holds over $120 billion in U.S. Treasuries. The Gulf states combined hold over $400 billion. This creates a closed loop. Countries buy dollars to purchase oil. Oil exporters receive dollars. Oil exporters buy U.S. bonds. America borrows cheaply to fund deficits. Repeat. America gets to run massive trade deficits without consequence. Gets to borrow at low interest rates. Gets to print dollars without hyperinflation. Because the world needs those dollars to keep the lights on. It's the most elegant financial weapon ever devised. And it's invisible to most people. But here's where it becomes a weapon, not just a system. An instrument of coercion. Iraq, 2000. Saddam Hussein makes an announcement that will seal his fate. Iraq will no longer accept dollars for oil, only euros. He calls it economic independence, a strike against American imperialism. The decision is financially suicidal. Oil buyers prefer dollar transactions. Iraq's revenue drops immediately. But Saddam doesn't care. It's symbolic, political. Then, in 2003, the United States invades. The official reason, weapons of mass destruction. No WMDs are ever found. But one of the first acts of the interim Iraqi government after Saddam's overthrow, switch oil sales back to dollars. In 2003, before the invasion, the international oil trade was 100% dollar denominated. Today, after Iraq's example, it's still 100% dollar denominated. The message was clear. Challenge the petrodollar, face consequences. Libya, 2009. Muammar Gaddafi proposes something even more threatening. Not just switching Libya's oil to euros, but creating a gold-backed pan-African currency, the gold dinar. Gaddafi pitches it to the African Union. oil and resources across Africa would be sold for gold dinars, not dollars or euros. He's not just challenging the petrodollar. He's threatening to pull an entire continent out of the dollar system. Gaddafi has $7 billion in gold reserves to back the new currency. He's been accumulating it for years. The plan gains traction. Several African nations express interest. Then, in 2011, NATO intervenes in Libya's civil war. Gaddafi is killed by rebels backed by Western airstrikes. Hillary Clinton's emails, leaked years later, reveal a memo from her advisor, Sidney Blumenthal. The subject: French motivations for intervention in Libya. The quote: Gaddafi's plan to create a gold-backed African currency was a threat to the French franc's role in Africa. This was a major factor in France's decision to attack. Not mentioned in the memo but understood, the gold dinar threatened the dollar even more than the franc. After Gaddafi's death, the gold reserves disappear. The gold dinar plan dies. Libya's oil sales? Back to dollars. The pattern repeats. Let's talk about Iran. Still under sanctions today, partly because of petrodollar defiance. In 2007, Iran opened the Iranian oil bourse, a market to sell oil in currencies other than dollars: euros, yen, yuan, anything but dollars. The stated goal: end dollar dependence, trade with countries under U.S. sanctions. The implicit threat: if Iran succeeds, other countries might follow. Within months, the United States pushes for expanded sanctions. By 2012, Iran is locked out of SWIFT, the banking system that processes dollar transactions. Iran's oil exports collapsed from 2.5 million barrels per day to less than 1 million. Not because the oil disappeared, because buyers can't pay for it without dollars and SWIFT access. The sanctions are described as punishment for nuclear development. But the timing is notable. Iran starts oil bourse in 2007. Sanctions tighten in 2012. Iran agrees to nuclear deal in 2015. Sanctions lift temporarily. Trump abandons deal in 2018. Sanctions return. But one thing remains constant. Iran cannot sell oil freely in non-dollar currencies. The petrodollar system must be protected, even at the cost of decades of sanctions and near war. Venezuela provides another case study. In 2017, Venezuela announced it would issue oil-backed bonds denominated in yuan and other currencies, moving away from dollar oil sales. President Maduro called it liberating Venezuela from the dollar tyranny. Within months, the Trump administration imposed the harshest sanctions in Venezuelan history. Venezuelan assets frozen, oil sales to the U.S. banned. The official reason? Maduro's authoritarian governance and human rights abuses. But the governance issues had existed for years. The sanctions came immediately after the petrodollar challenge. Venezuela's economy collapsed under sanctions. Oil production fell by 70%. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency. And the oil-backed yuan bonds? Never materialized. Venezuela lacked the stability to execute the plan. The message, again, challenge the petrodollar, face economic annihilation. Here's the data that reveals the system's power. Global oil trade, approximately 100 million barrels per day. At $80 per barrel, that's $8 billion in transactions daily, $3 trillion annually, all of it in dollars. This means global dollar demand of $3 trillion per year just for energy, not counting natural gas, coal, or other commodities also priced in dollars. That demand keeps dollar interest rates lower than they'd otherwise be. Economists estimate it saves the U.S. government 0.5% to 1% on borrowing costs, on $34 trillion in national debt. That's $170 billion to $340 billion saved annually. Just from petrodollar demand, it's a subsidy from the rest of the world to American deficit spending. And it's enforced not by law, but by the threat of exclusion from energy markets. But the system is cracking. Slowly, quietly, dangerously. China has been the most systematic challenger. In 2018, China launched the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, a platform to trade oil futures in yuan, not dollars. Crucially, the yuan contracts are convertible to gold. Buyers can take physical gold instead of yuan if they want. This addresses the main objection to non-dollar oil trade. What do you do with the currency if it's not globally accepted? China's answer: convert it to gold. Russia immediately began selling oil to China in yuan. Iran followed, Venezuela, Angola. Brazil started accepting yuan for some sales. By 2023, approximately 20% of global oil trade happens in non-dollar currencies. Still a minority, but growing, and the trend accelerated after 2022, when the United States froze Russia's dollar reserves as punishment for the Ukraine invasion. That move terrified every oil exporting nation, because it revealed the truth. Dollar reserves aren't safe if America decides to weaponize access. Saudi Arabia, America's original petrodollar partner, started making noise about accepting yuan for Chinese oil sales. In 2023, Saudi Arabia joined the BRICS Development Bank, a Chinese-led alternative to Western financial institutions. The House of Saud is hedging, keeping the U.S. alliance, but also preparing for a world where the petrodollar isn't guaranteed, because the weapon is losing its edge, and everyone can see it. Let's talk about what this means for American power. The petrodollar system has allowed the United States to run trade deficits for 50 years without consequence. America imports $1 trillion more than it exports annually. That's $1 trillion in goods received without payment. How? Because the payment dollars flows back to buy U.S. treasuries. If the petrodollar system collapses, that inflow stops. Treasury yields spike, borrowing becomes expensive, deficits become unsustainable. The U.S. would have to choose, balance the budget immediately, or face currency collapse. Balancing would require either massive tax increases or massive spending cuts. Social Security, Medicare, defense, all would face cuts. Politically impossible, which means currency collapse becomes the likely path. Inflation spikes, the dollar loses reserve status, living standards fall. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps Treasury officials awake at night, and it's why every challenge to the petrodollar is met with maximum force. Iraq, Libya, Iran, Venezuela, different pretexts, same underlying threat. But here's the ironic part. The very weapon America uses to enforce the petrodollar sanctions and financial exclusion is accelerating its demise. When the U.S. froze Afghanistan's dollar reserves in 2021, the Taliban government couldn't access funds to buy food imports. Millions faced starvation. When Russian reserves were frozen in 2022, $300 billion was confiscated overnight. Decades of accumulated savings gone. Every country watching thought the same thing. That could be us. So they started diversifying, slowly selling treasuries, slowly accumulating gold, slowly building alternative payment systems. China and Russia created SIPS, a yuan-based alternative to SWIFT. It's small now, but growing. India is settling oil trades with Russia in rupees. The Gulf states are accepting yuan. The dollar still dominates. Over 80% of oil trade is still dollar-denominated. But the trajectory is clear. And trajectories matter more than current positions. Because the petrodollar isn't enforced by law, it's enforced by convenience and fear. Convenience. Dollars are liquid, widely accepted, stable. Fear. Challenge the system, face consequences. But if the fear becomes whole dollars, risk confiscation, then the fear reverses. And the weapon turns on its wielder. Here's what most people don't understand. The petrodollar system is why America can afford its military. The United States spends $800 billion annually on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined. That spending is funded by borrowing. The deficit is covered by selling treasuries. And treasuries are bought by oil exporters recycling petrodollars. If the petrodollar system ends, the military budget becomes unaffordable. Not immediately, but within a decade. The empire built on oil-backed currency would collapse not from military defeat, but from fiscal reality. This is why the petrodollar is defended more aggressively than any territorial border. It's not about oil. It's about the ability to project power globally without paying for it in real time. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of the entire system. In 1945, Franklin Roosevelt met King Abdulaziz on a warship in the Suez Canal. They forged an alliance, U.S., protection for Saudi oil access. In 1974, that alliance was upgraded. Petrodollar exclusivity for weapons and security guarantees. For 50 years, Saudi Arabia has honored the deal. Despite differences over Israel, despite 9 over 11 attackers being Saudi nationals, despite human rights abuses, the U.S. looked the other way because the petrodollar mattered more than everything else. But the relationship is fraying. In 2022, Saudi Arabia refused Biden's request to increase oil production to offset Russian sanctions. In 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran, enemies for decades, normalized relations, brokered by China, not the U.S. In 2024, Saudi Arabia is discussing BRICS membership and yuan oil sales. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman knows the U.S. needs Saudi cooperation more than Saudi Arabia needs U.S. protection. Because the threats have changed. Iran is contained through regional alliances. Internal stability is maintained through surveillance and control. The U.S. military umbrella matters less than it did in 1974. And the cost of that umbrella, petrodollar exclusivity, is starting to look expensive. If Saudi Arabia breaks the petrodollar, the system collapses overnight. OPEC follows the Saudis. always has. And the U.S. would face a choice: accept the loss of financial dominance or go to war with its oldest Middle Eastern ally. Neither option is acceptable, which is why the Treasury Department watches Riyadh more closely than Moscow these days. Here's the human cost of the petrodollar weapon. Iraq. Over 200,000 civilian deaths from the 2003 invasion and subsequent occupation. Millions displaced. Libya. A functioning state reduced to militia-controlled chaos. Slave markets operating openly in 2017. Venezuela. Sanctions contributed to economic collapse. Millions fled the country. Malnutrition spiked. Iran. Sanctions prevented medicine imports during COVID. Thousands died preventable deaths. The petrodollar isn't just an economic system. It's a framework that justifies intervention, sanctions, and regime change. And the justifications are always laundered through other narratives: WMDs, humanitarian intervention, democracy promotion, human rights. But the pattern is consistent. Countries that challenge dollar dominance in oil trade face severe consequences. Countries that comply, even authoritarian regimes like Saudi Arabia, receive protection and partnership. The weapon doesn't discriminate based on democracy or human rights. It discriminates based on petrodollar compliance. So where does this end? 3 scenarios, all with massive implications. Scenario 1. Managed decline. The dollar slowly loses its oil monopoly over decades. America adjusts, reduces deficit spending, cuts military presence abroad. Living standards decline gradually. But the transition is orderly. This is the optimistic scenario. It requires political courage America hasn't shown in generations. Scenario 2. Sudden collapse. A major oil exporter, likely Saudi Arabia, announces yuan acceptance. OPEC follows within months. Dollar demand crashes. Treasury yields spike. The U.S. faces a fiscal crisis. Emergency measures, capital controls, forced treasury purchases, possible default. Global recession follows. The post-1944 order collapses. This is the nightmare scenario. And it becomes more likely with each sanctions action. Scenario 3. War. America uses military force to prevent petrodollar collapse, either direct intervention or proxy conflict. The targets would be countries trying to build alternative systems, likely China, possibly Saudi Arabia, if it defects. The weapon that enforced the petrodollar military dominance is used one final time to preserve the system. This is the darkest scenario, and the most dangerous, because unlike Iraq or Libya, war with China or a Saudi Arabia allied with China would be catastrophic. Here's what you need to understand. The petrodollar is the foundation of American power in the 21st century. Not democracy, not innovation, not military strength. The ability to print the world's reserve currency and have that currency automatically demanded for energy purchases. That's the empire, and it's more fragile than it appears. Every sanction weakens it. Every frozen reserve account accelerates the search for alternatives. The weapon is powerful, but weapons can be turned against their users. In 1973, oil sold for any currency. By 1975, only dollars. That deal made America into a hyperpower, allowed deficits without limit, funded the largest military in history. But deals made in secret can be unmade in secret, and the world is watching, waiting, diversifying. History doesn't repeat, it reveals. And right now, it's revealing that the petrodollar system, the invisible weapon that shaped 50 years of geopolitics, is entering its final act. The question isn't whether it will end. The question is how. Managed decline, sudden collapse, or war. Welcome to the endgame of the quiet war weapon, the one built on oil, backed by violence, and sustained by fear, the one that's finally starting to crack,